is basically that bad bank. So they've now decided, because a bailout always helps the shareholders, and now they've decided that the shareholders should basically face the music and they should bear the consequences of their actions and their investments.
We had a similar situation with Northern Rock in the UK, where the good bit has been sold to Virgin and the bad bit has been left with the taxpayer, which is nice. Staying with Belgium, we saw a complete lack of government for a long time, I think 2 years, as various Flemish and French Belgian politicians bickered themselves to a complete standstill. However, last Monday, I believe, alas, this has changed and now you have a government again. The Belgian government is back. Can you describe how you ended up with no government for a long time, and how did this vampire manage to revive itself from the dead?
So, Andy, we've had 1.5 years of, let's say, political anarchy, which was basically the result of the fact that Belgium as a country no longer exists. I mean, if it had ever existed in the first place, but now it no longer exists. We have a Dutch-speaking majority of 60% of the population in the north and a French-speaking minority of 40% in the south. And both parts have their own media, their own language, their own political institutions, their own political debate. And the Belgian public sphere no longer exists. So what happened was, in the last election, it became obvious that the southern part of the country had chosen to elect center-left to far-left people, and in the north, people had elected people who call themselves to be on the center-right of politics. And the Belgian constitution requires a Belgian government to have the backing of basically both sides, of a majority of both groups in that government. And it took 1.5 years to come to a compromise on the policies of that government. And that's basically what triggered this 1.5 year of political anarchy. Now, you asked, how did this vampire manage to revive itself from the dead? This, of course, is caused by this euro crisis. I remember myself writing an article in 2008 when we had another political crisis that lasted over 1 year without the government. And then I was claiming that the reason why they could decide to postpone all compromises and keep the thing running was because Belgium did not have a currency of its own anymore, and basically the currency was stable. Today, we live in a different world, and now the reason for the government to finally get his acts together and form a government coalition was also created or induced by this euro crisis, because now the markets were targeting the Belgian government and short-selling Belgian bonds. So now, these politicians felt a need to transcend their differences and come up with a compromise. And of course, for libertarians, the compromise is pretty bad.
Do you feel safer in your bed now that the Belgian government has recreated itself?
When I use the word political anarchy, I don't mean anarchy in the sense that people might actually use the word for. Belgium is a country with 9 governments, 9 parliamentary assemblies, and only one of those 9 did not reach a political governing coalition compromise. So basically, Belgium has always been under government control in the last 1.5 years. And actually, another reason I think why the Walloons, the southern Belgians, finally accepted the terms of some agreement was because they also noticed in society that more and more people were basically thinking that there was no need to have a Belgian government, which of course would have further strengthened the secessionist movements in the north of the country.
Where I live in the UK, I think I live under 6 different layers of government, and I never feel safe without knowing there's these 6 levels of government controlling my life. Getting back to the EU, how do you think this current EU and ECB chaos is going to resolve itself in the long run?
To me, the entire Euro crisis is like what we're witnessing is a train crash in slow motion. And some people say it without someone in the driver's seat. I disagree with that, because there's plenty of people in the driver's seat. It is just blatant incompetence and not understanding the true mechanisms of society and economics. So how will it resolve itself? I am sure that the ECB, which has now been buying up bad debt from the member states, who were unable to finance that debt on the private market themselves, they will keep buying up those bonds at rock-bottom interest rates to counter whatever the increasing spread on the market. You can buy bonds for free. So somewhere they need to print money to pay for that process. So they will keep printing money out of thin air until the moment that the monetary inflation will trickle down to the real economy. And of course, in Austrian school theory, inflation is measured on the basis of the bank increasing its money supply or not. But in society itself, in the debate in society, inflation is seen as the increases in consumer prices, which, given that all banks or most of the banks are holding a lot of the cheap ECB credit in cash on their balances and are not lending it out, the monetary inflation has not yet trickled down to the real economy. And we're now witnessing or experiencing inflation rates of between 3 to 5%, according to government statistics. So the moment that inflation will really hit the real economy and governments will no longer be able to tell the people that there is no inflation and that printing money is and remains a good thing, at that moment I think the euro eventually will break apart or will completely disappear.
Well, let's all pray for that. Speaking about government statistics, they would say that we've never been freer, though you and I know differently. How do you think we can preserve what's left of freedom in Europe, those of us who live here, in the face of growing financial repression from the EU and other organisations? Or even, God forbid, how can we extend this freedom that we have?
This basically depends on your personal fortune and your personal wealth and the way you make your living. Of course, I'm a bit of a pessimist when it comes to the immediate future of the EU, but I'm also sure that the same is true in the US and many other countries with similar institutions and similar problems. And I'm also sure that, like on the internet, if you check some Austrian school or libertarian website, you do find a proper textbook or copybook of what the stuff you have to do. If you're making money which is not linked to the territory you actually live on, put your companies offshore. If you have wealth you would like to keep safe from the hands of government, move your wealth offshore. Another thing, if you're thinking of buying property, think twice, because as we've seen in Greece, the easiest way to tax people is to tax stuff they cannot move. So the moment you've bought a house or an apartment, there is no way for you to not pay a tax levied on property, which is what happened in Greece. So basically, I would not start, don't get me wrong, I would not start stockpiling food or ammunition, basically, but I would recommend everyone to take some precautions for the times ahead. Also, when it comes to like hyperinflation or inflation, don't invest in fiat currencies, and if you do, take fiat currencies that are proven to be stable, like the Singapore dollar and the New Zealand dollar, or invest in commodities or precious metals. But I think now, in the immediate future, there is no real option to extend your freedom. It is now about keeping your freedom and trying to keep as much of your individual, value that you can. Another thing is basically, I do not think that the EU or the fiat currency problem will basically end in tears. I'm afraid it will all end in tear gas. Because the moment hyperinflation hits or inflation hits Europe, we might see riots in the street. It is very unclear to me, because I don't have a crystal ball, to see how that point will evolve. And for as long as there's 99% who feel they have the right to take away the livelihood of the 1% top earners, I think we haven't seen the worst yet.
It's interesting you say keep your wealth offshore and keep it fluid and mobile, because one of the major causes of freedom in Europe was the Dutch fishermen putting their wealth into fishing boats which they could just sail away from Holland. And because of the way Holland flooded, all the kings in the area couldn't confiscate those things. And then when the Dutch sort of took over England in 1688, they brought into England all the same sorts of policies they had in Holland, which was to do with helping merchants and people move things around, which then of course went to the United States, to New Amsterdam and New York and all those places. So that's an interesting thought. Murray Rothbard used to always be a short-term pessimist, but he was always a very long-term optimist at all times. So I think maybe we will come through this, but like you say, we need to be there on the other side, and the best way to do that is to preserve our wealth, if we have any, or to generate some if we have any, and then move it away from these parasites. But you might be able to help some people with some of this, especially people in Europe. So on a final note, Vincent, and thank you for your time so far, if people do want to keep up with your consultancy work in Brussels and Belgium, how do they find you?
My company is a boutique consultancy, so we don't really cater for the general public, and we don't even have a website. So basically, I would recommend everyone who is interested in those ideas or in advice or just wants to catch up with me to just find me on Facebook, where they can just tap in my name and I'll come up, and I'm very happy to answer questions and get in touch with people who would find it useful.
If anybody wants to do that, Vincent De Roeck the spelling of Roeck is Roeck. I'd like to thank you very much, Vincent, for your time today. Dank u wel, Vincent De Roeck, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
It was a pleasure, Andy. Thank you very much.